Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn.
All right, we're going to start out with the Nymph-Head on our hook. And the way I get that to seat in there is I just take some 015 lead-free wire and you do a few little wraps right behind it, and then we'll sneak those wraps up into the groove there, up inside of that. And then once it's seated, we're just going to start off with our thread and build a little tapered body up into the lead-free wire, and then just continue that. And that will just hold it in. So that's what it's looking like. Okay, so next we're going to take our olive dyed pheasant tail. So since it's a crawling mayfly nymph, the body's going to be squatty. And so that's why I went with the clinger crawler Nymph-Head. And so it's not going to be as long and its proportion as other mayflies might be. So what I'm going to do is grab 4 or 5 of the pheasant tail fibers, and I like to do the pheasant tail fibers in one piece. So what we'll do is we'll get our tips aligned, and we're going to work our way back down to just on the bend where it's going to start into the bend. And this is where everything's going to get tied in for all intents and purposes. We want this a little bit shorter than the body, the hook shank length. And so I'm going to tie that off here. And I want those tail fibers on top, so just make sure that they rotate to be on top. And if they're a little long, you can simply adjust them by pulling. And then I like to take one wrap up behind them and kind of pull that in, and then as I let go, they'll sit back down. Okay, now we're going to leave this. Don't forget to leave the main clump off to the side here, and that will be the body. So we're going to tie in the other pieces first. So last up goes first in, and so the wire is going to be the last. So we're going to grab some of our olive small UTC ultra wire, and I like to tie that in on the side nearest me, and that's going to go all the way up to the bead. Okay, and then next I'm going to grab some of my tinsel or Mylar. So it's I use this uni Mylar, and it's the size 16 in Peacock orange. And I'm going to tie it in with the orange side up so that the Peacock side shows. And we'll use that to kind of add some contrast to the pheasant tail fibers of the body here. And for a lot of these fibers like this, you want to tie them a little bit angled towards you, and then as you bring the thread over the top, that additional thread torque will bring the material right on top. And if it doesn't, then you can scoot it over with your fingers. Okay, so that's all we have for the body there. That's going to make that up, and I'm just going to come back up here, and if you I already have a pretty decent taper, so I don't need to, but if you didn't, you want to fill your thread in there to get some taper. So the body, we're going to create a counter wrap like you do with a pheasant tail. So the pheasant fibers themselves are going to go your normal wrapping direction, and so that would be away from you. And I'll just go all the way up, even though we're going to wrap back over this, to just where that lead the lead-free wire is tied in. Now I'm going to bring up the Mylar, and I usually just like to gauge, again, this needs to be as centered as we can along the body there. Like that. And I'm going to keep this on here. And now the wire, I'm going to wrap it backwards. And that will reinforce the pheasant tail fibers because they're going in the opposite direction. And I just want to keep this nice and even and come up with a few wraps. And then just make sure when you tie that off, because you're going the opposite direction, I'll usually give it a couple wraps like that, and then pull tight on the wire, and then I'm going to give it a few more wraps going forward, and then in front of it. And then you can just helicopter that off. So that's our body there, relatively even. Okay, now for the thorax area, and this is where a drake nymph, for instance, is going to be a little different than a Baetis nymph, and that is it's a lot more fat. It's a lot fatter and thicker. So this tinsel is going to also be used to come up over the thorax. So I'm just going to wrap that back, and I want that to be just about at the hook point. So right in there. And now I'm going to put my Fino skin or skinny skin. You can use whatever you want depending on the coloration. Some of these are going to be darker olive. Some look brown, and so you just want to vary it to the naturals that you're trying to imitate. But again, just going to go right on top, so that when we turn and pull these over, it'll be centered. And then now it's relatively easy. We're going to grab some Hare'e ice dub, and this is a peacock color. And I'm going to dub the thorax to just behind the bead here. Now, one thing, these nymph heads are fairly wide, and so you can see a little bit of gap in the right here. Get my hand to hold still enough right in there. So you want to make sure that you get enough dubbing, and then we're going to add some more in here in a second, but that's just something to be aware of. And so I do need a little bit of space right now. So we're going to take some partridge, and this is just some dyed olive partridge. I'll go ahead and cut a V, and then I just use this over the top, just like so. And we want the legs to go about back to just before we get to the end of that body. And so I'll lay that on top of the nymph head, just so that my the stem is right there at the end. And I'm going to come in here with my other hand and pinch. Pinch the fibers. And then a couple of loose wraps. Okay, now I've done a couple of loose wraps, and I can let go and just kind of analyze where my legs are. And with it like it is now, you can move those around. You can adjust the length if you want, but that looks pretty good. And then I'll give it a couple of cinch wraps. And then I'm going to go in front of this a little too. And then I'll just trim this off as closely as I can to the bead. And this is where super sharp scissors come in handy. Let's get that as clean and as close as possible. Now don't worry, number one, if the legs are flailing out to the side, we'll fix that in a minute. But the drakes nymphs actually do have legs that are a little bit more out to the side of the body. But not to worry here. So one thing I like to do is, because again we're still having some of those gaps, you can see that gap right down in the body, just grab a little tiny bit more dubbing. And I'm going to make a wrap. And what I like to do is pull the legs back, and then you can add that wrap, and you'll notice it kind of helps push our legs back a little bit. And now we'll take the back here, a couple wraps with that, and then I'll pull the Mylar over, and that kind of completes our little design there. Now again, this is where you need some good sharp scissors. And as close as you can pull this skinny skin or Fino skin pretty tight. And then I'll come back in here, and if I have any more gaps, which I don't here, you could throw in a little bit more dubbing. And so gonna whip finish. Okay, now we're almost done. All right, now as the last step, what I like to do is get a little bit of UV resin. And what I've been using on these ones is the fluorescing stuff from Loon. So it's basically flow, but it's a fluorescing property. And I'm just going to cover this right at the joint where I tied it off, and then the shell back there. And you can see how that really just fluoresces like something fierce. In this case, I'm going to give a little bit more, one more little coat here. And there we go.